Sometimes we cannot know what are all the decisions that are going to need to be made and what are the things that we would choose. But one of the things that we can center on is what is important. Like, what is it ultimately that we want? What's going to be our North Star?
Hi, Michelle Florendo here, and welcome to Ask a Decision Engineer. Listen in and find out how to untangle big decisions with less stress and more clarity. Today's episode is going to be an Ask Me Anything episode, where I answer questions sent by you, the listeners, about decision making. I'd love to hear what you're wondering about decision making. So if you have a question you'd like me to answer on the show, head over to askadecisionengineer.com and leave me a message.
Hi.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
This is Christopher from New York.
This is Hannah from Melbourne, Australia.
My name is Tomas, and I live in Dublin, in Ireland.
I'm Aga from Warsaw, Poland.
And my question for you is...
My question is...
I am wondering...
I'd really love to know...
I have a question for you.
Hey, Michelle, this is Lisa from just outside of DC. I really love your podcast, but I noticed there wasn't a season this past summer. So I'm curious, are you on a break? Are you and your podcast coming back? Would love to hear. Thanks.
Lisa, you are not the only person who asked me that question last year. And so for those of you who are just dipping into the podcast now, I had published a season of this podcast every year since the year that my daughter was born, except for in 2023. In 2023, I did not publish a season of the podcast, and a number of people asked me, hey, what's going on? Why isn't there a season? Are you coming back? Is this podcast over? And now that I am coming back to the podcast, I did want to answer for those of you who had noticed why there wasn't a season last year. It's a bit hard for me to talk about, and so again, I brought in my friend Shanice to help me.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I spent the last week binging your podcast episodes as I'm making some decisions in my life. And then there's a noticeable gap. I noticed in 2023, there is no podcast. So can you share a little bit about how you arrived at the decision to take a pause in that year and then coming back to it in 2024?
Yeah. So in 2023, there were some major things just happening in my family. Actually, it started in fall of 2022, and I needed to be able to trim down all of my obligations to really focus on my family. And that's probably like a common theme that people who know me have heard come up in terms of being able to take care of my family in the way that is needed. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, one of the other things that I'll say is for those of you who are listening, this is going to be a bit of a heavy episode, but it's one that I'm recording because part of this podcast is being able to share things that I've learned and things that may be helpful to other people. And there are a number of people in my life who know about this event that I'll be describing and have asked me to document it so that they can both replicate it with their families or even share it with others who they know are going through similar situations.
Well, thank you for being willing to dive a little bit deeper this episode and share something that is really vulnerable for you and your life and your experience. But I know how important family is for you. So would you mind talking a little bit more about that experience and what took place during that 2023 when you decided to take a pause and really be there for family?
So like I said, it started in the fall of 2022, and actually we're recording this episode in November of 2024, and it's basically like exactly 2 years ago that we found out that my mother-in-law was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal pancreatic cancer. And it was a shock because she was a very active, physically fit woman. She was a 4th-degree black belt and still practicing.
Wow.
At the age of 78.
What? Wow.
So my in-laws live about 10 minutes away from me. They did, and they were a big part of being able to care for my kids. And I still remember the day after Halloween, she was trying to walk my daughter up the hill in her neighborhood, and she had some abdominal pain. And through various appointments, she had it checked out, and we found out about this diagnosis. And my husband is an only child, and so really like this hit him hard. It hit all of us hard. And of course, there was just like so many feelings, so many thoughts, so many like, how do we proceed? And I still remember that year, my husband and I were both turning 40. We were 12 days apart. And we had booked this like weekend getaway to Napa later in November. And I remember blurting out to my in-laws, I was like, hey, what are you doing that weekend before Thanksgiving? Why don't you just come join us? And I started embarking on essentially planning the most difficult thing that I've had to do in my life, which was an end-of-life planning retreat for my mother-in-law.
Can you share a little bit about like, I've never heard of like end of life retreat, and that seems like such a big undertaking, knowing the transition that's about to transpire. Can you share a little bit about like how you made the decision to support her in that way by facilitating a retreat, and what that consists of?
Yeah. I mean, I think I realized that given the work that I do as a coach and a specialist in decision making, and one who teaches people about decision making skills, and someone who has facilitation skills, I was in a position to help my family have conversations and constructive conversations about how to approach the inevitable decisions that would need to come, both the ones we knew were going to come and the ones that we may not know are coming. But I wanted to be able to facilitate a space where people could talk about what they wanted and what their vision was for the time that was going to come. Because again, it was very clear that her chances for survival were very small, if any. And so it really was going to be a discussion of how is it that she wanted to move through her remaining days, and how is it that we all could support those wishes.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people have different opinions and decisions around how they want to spend that time. So how were you able to lead that conversation and make sure that at least people felt heard in the conversation?
So like I said, we scheduled a weekend where it was basically my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my husband, and myself. And we went off and we mixed it with celebration. Like my in-laws were celebrating their 53rd wedding anniversary. And like I said, my husband and I were celebrating milestone birthdays. And so we took some time just so that we could be together, maybe catch a breath before all of the things that were to come. And the first thing that I did was I knew that everyone was going in with all sorts of things on their mind already about like various questions they had, or various things that they wanted to make sure that were going to be discussed, or various decisions that they wanted to weigh in on. And so the first thing I did was I gave everybody a bunch of Post-its and said, okay, write down all of the things, all of the decisions, the thoughts, the questions, that whatever it is, like one question or thought per Post-it, just write them all down so that we can set them aside. Because I think that's something that can be really useful going into situations where there's just like a lot that we are carrying. How is it that we can unburden ourselves so that then we can get to the deeper conversation? So I had that do that first. And so I collected all of those different thoughts, feelings, decisions, questions, and set them to the side. And then I walked them through an exercise where we would approach the way that I saw it. There were going to be a few different stages that we were going to have to move through together as a family. There was the first stage of just digesting this news It was still a shock. We were going to have to digest it together. We were still getting the lay of the land of what are the things that we needed to take care of from a medical perspective in order to support her, logistics, and then also like communication out to extended family and community. So there's just kind of like the settling in to this news phase. Then I knew there was going to be a phase after that that would be where she's possibly going through treatment or like it's impacting her body. She just physically wouldn't be the same as she was before. And then there's going to be another phase where it was really like final days where we knew we were nearing the end. And then the fourth phase would be after her passing. And I think the reason why I set up those phases is because, you know, when you think about decision making, oftentimes there are contextual things that may be affecting. What are the decisions that we need to make? How are we approaching them? And anytime that there might be like big shifts in your objectives, what you want, the options, the ways you might achieve those things, and information, or you know, like what data do you have on how those options fulfill your objectives? You have opportunities to make new decisions. So I wanted to delineate these different phases because there might be different things that we wanted to consider. And so taking each phase one by one, I then went around and had my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my husband, and myself, because they made it very clear that I was part of this process with them. I had each person write down what did they want to feel in that phase. Because one of the things that I found, especially when it comes to personal decisions, I think in one of my episodes about objectives, I talked about means objectives and fundamental objectives, like, you know, the things that we want because they're a means to get something else. And how, you know, if you ask yourself, why do I want this thing? Why? You get down to the fundamental objective. And when it comes to things like how we want to live our life, how we want to spend our time and energy, and what's important to us in these personal decisions, it almost always ends up with because we want to feel a certain way. So that was the thing that I had people center on. How do you want to feel in this phase? And, you know, like things came up like unburdened or supportive, if they're one of the supporters, helpful, calm, and then talking about the other phases. And then again, like in around asking them to write down and then share with the others. How do you want to feel? And so from there, we were able to capture what was important, not only to my mother-in-law as she was going to be living out the final days of her life, but also for the immediate circle of support around her. Like, how did they want to feel, both in relation to her, but also for themselves? Because I think one of the things we realized was like, once we got to talking about the third phase, there were words coming up instead of, you know, from the support circle, not just being helpful, but also feeling supported, recognizing the exhaustion that would likely emerge, given we also did not know how much time she had, but we knew that it was very likely less than a year. And so we went. And then when we got to the fourth phase, my mother-in-law was just listening then, because she wouldn't be around to us describing how we hoped we would feel. And also like what does that mean for what we might need.
Wow. That's really beautiful to hold space in that way. And I'm curious, can you share a little bit about how you felt like that conversation and really holding space to support the emotions and the feelings around the experience? How do you think it supported not only yourself, but the other members of the family just during that journey and even afterwards, like after her passing and her transition?
I mean, I think there's something about being able to clarify what's really important, right? And really important from the perspective of how we want to feel and what we want and need. Because I think that when we embark on something new. Like this was new. I mean, this is the first time we've had to face the mortality of a parent between like my husband and I. And we did not know. And sometimes we cannot know what are all the decisions that are going to need to be made and what are the things that we would choose. But one of the things that we can center on is what is important. Like, what is it ultimately that we want? What's going to be our North Star? And some of these words that had been captured over the course of this retreat were things that fed into decisions that happened later. Like in January, when the chemo and the treatments were taking a huge toll on her body and were really impacting her quality of life. She was just like, this is not how I wanted to feel. Where's that paper that Michelle captured all? This is not how I wanted to feel. It's time to make a new decision. And that's when we made the difficult decision to stop treatment and move into the hospice phase of things. And it was driven by that clarity of how is it that we wanted to feel? How does it that she wanted to feel? And then secondarily, how is it that we wanted to feel as her support network? And we may not have known ahead of time what that decision would be or what was going to be the choice that optimized things. But again, being clear, at least centering on and naming what was important was hugely useful as we were moving through all sorts of other decisions that happened over the course of the last 4 months of her life.
So it sounds like just holding space to name what you wanted out of the experience was really powerful for when you're going through experience and you're not feeling that way. It gives you a lot of data to like go back to like, well, what do I actually want? How do I really want to feel? And then help you navigate the decisions moving forward because you have like the data of what is there or what is missing or what needs to happen next. And you held the space to really hone in on that. And so when it felt different than that, you're able to make decisions moving forward from that. And so if it's okay, reflecting back on that, how do you feel like it supported you afterwards? Like it's past, it's 2024, knowing that you held the space and the time to really interrogate your feelings and share and support each other. How do you feel like making the decision to have the retreat and have the conversation in that way change the experience or alter the experience that you guys are having now that she's not here?
Yeah. I mean, I think just holding the space to have conversations about what was important to everyone involved was useful because, again, even though she is no longer here with us, we also know and understand what were some of her wishes for after her passing, or like what to do with all her stuff. That is still a process that we are going through. How is it that we will support my father-in-law who survived her? And again, sometimes we can't like possibly plan everything in advance, but at least like having those inputs to feed into various decisions as they are coming up makes the process easier to navigate.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like having gone through this process, sometimes it's hard to conceive of or even just like realize all of the different things that need to be done, the decisions to be made in a really emotional time. And so again, being able to have a compass for navigating through that can be so useful. It doesn't really like make the emotional burden any less, but it keeps all of this other logistical stuff from really piling on.
Yeah. So this experience, this retreat, this framework that you're talking about, I don't recall listening back to your podcast, this being similar to some of the frameworks that you talk about in decision making. So I'm curious, like, how does this connect to decision making? If you
Yeah.
could share a little bit more about that.
I think there are a few concepts that are coming through in what I ended up facilitating for my in-laws. And so one is the principle of writing things down, like even just being able to write things down or externalize. So sometimes when we're moving through many decisions or big decisions, there's so much that's just locked up in our heads, hearts, and bodies. And through the act of externalizing it, whether onto paper or in conversation, it makes it easier to process what is usually a very difficult thing. So I think that's one, being able to find ways to externalize what's happening in a decision. I think second, again, that focus on what really matters and recognizing and acknowledging the emotional piece of things. Like when it comes to these personal decisions, we cannot make them without acknowledging what are the feelings that are involved. And sometimes they can be a compass. What do we want to feel? And then from there, backwards mapping, okay, well, what is it that we would need in order to feel that way? And then surfacing, like, okay, then how might we achieve those things as we're going through the process? So that's centering on, again, what matters and acknowledging the emotions and the way that emotions can point to what we may need. And then I think third, like, again, recognizing that it's not like we just make one decision and we're done.
Right.
There's often lots of them, but again, recognizing and kind of building in the expectation of these checkpoints of like, okay, hey, things have changed. Let's evaluate. Is there opportunities to make new decisions here so that we can continue to bend the path towards the things that we want? And so recognizing that in advance instead of just assuming I only have to make this one decision and then everything will go smoothly, because it will not.
Like this is just one of many decisions that
Right.
we're gonna have to make along our journey. So that's really helpful. And ultimately, what I got out of that is just holding space to write it down, like you said, like the number one, but doing it in collaboration with other people and taking in their feelings and their emotions. And I don't know, I think that is such a powerful framework that, I mean, maybe cognitively we know that these things could be helpful, but we don't actually hold the space in our life to do the thing.
It.
Yeah, for sure. And so I know that you make this podcast to really help and support people who are going through big decisions or tough life transitions or all the things that come up in our human experience. And you are a trained coach and facilitator and speaker, and I've seen you, and I know how beautifully you facilitated this conversation. So what advice might you give someone who might not have the skills or expertise that you have if they want to do something similar for a loved one who might be experiencing something similar?
I think even the simple question, how do you want to feel, can be so powerful, because even before this was happening with my mother-in-law, my own father had a major health event. He had a stroke in his eye, and thank goodness it was in his eye and not his brain. But I still remember the panic of, oh my gosh, have my parents done all of the end of life planning stuff, and what are the wishes I need to document? Like, he needed to go into surgery, like major surgery. There were risks associated. And in the overwhelm of that, I remember, well, okay, what is an entry point into these conversations about heavy things? And I was just kind of like, well, I think this question of how do you want to feel? How do you want to feel as you're living out, the golden years of your life? How is it that you want to feel as you're aging and your family is here wanting to support you? One thing that came up in my conversation with my dad was that he didn't want to feel like a burden. And that actually has been a North Star for a lot of decisions that he has made or we have discussed about the care of aging parents and like what happens if there's a medical emergency.
Yeah. So just holding space to really reflect and jot down and have conversations about how do you want to feel as you're navigating this experience is a really great place to start for yourself, for your family, if you do want to create something similar.
Yeah.
And so I think where I want to go next is the tenderness of that experience. And I'm sure a lot of emotions came up in that experience. And you said that they made it very clear that you're also a part of this and they want to know your feelings and your thoughts. So how were you able to navigate that, knowing that the feelings that were there were big and scary? And so if I'm facilitating this, like did you hold it together? How do you hold it together? Like,
I mean, I will
how's that?
admit that we had to take breaks. And so
Okay.
it's not as if we had this one conversation continuously over the course of several hours. We booked a weekend together and we had a big celebration dinner for their anniversary, our birthdays, before we started all the things. There were definitely breaks for snacks, breaks for hot tub, breaks for just like
I
going
understand.
on walks. Because it's true, the emotions that surface can be really heavy. And if we're not practiced at knowing what to do with the feelings so that we are in observation mode, because it's one thing to be able to name and observe feelings. It's a whole other thing to just like be in the feeling
Mm-hmm.
and have the feeling driving the car.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to have discussions that integrate all ways of knowing into decisions, we need to be able to have a little bit of distance from those emotions, like enough distance to actually just like name them versus
Mm-hmm.
be in them and consumed by them. So I
Yeah.
think that is something to keep an eye on and be aware of. And I think that's also a good practice of just like identifying like what is it that I need to be able to create enough space
Mm-hmm.
to like see and be with the emotion but not be consumed by it.
Can you share a little bit around like what are those other ways of knowing? You said like tap into like all my ways of knowing. So there's like a cognitive way of knowing, there's a social
Right.
way of knowing. Like, so what are some other ways of knowing we might tap into when the feelings and emotions are feeling all consuming?
Yeah. I mean, the emotions surface because they often point to needs.
Mm-hmm.
There are physical ways of knowing. And so even before, I mean, I know that like if I can feel my heartbeat like elevating and racing, or if I'm starting to feel clammy, like something is happening and I need to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I think about just like the ways of knowing that can be integrated into decision making, there's the cognitive, emotional, physical, head,
Mm-hmm.
heart, body. There's the
Mm-hmm.
social piece. I think there's also, this a spiritual piece of things. And I mean, that's a thread that's strong for me. It may not necessarily be like a huge thing for others, but it's also just like it's something else we can tap into.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about is ensuring that people feel equipped to bring these different ways of knowing into their decisions as opposed to holding on to just one or like trying to actively ignore others.
Yeah. And knowing what they are, like knowing that your body is telling you something and
Mm-hmm.
mind is telling you something and your emotions and your feelings, they are telling you something, but tapping into those other ways of knowing can really help you, I guess, not feel too constricted to just
Yeah.
the emotion and thinking about the other things as you are experiencing or navigating tough decisions in your life. And I think sometimes just being caught up in the emotions of the experience might not allow you to open up your your view to other possibilities or other
Mm-hmm.
experiences or other emotions that you might even be able to feel in this moment right now. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story and sending all of you and your family members lots of love and support. And thank you for really sharing something that is not the easiest thing to talk about and
Mm-hmm.
share and to support other people who might be going through a similar thing. I've never heard of this end of life retreat, but it's definitely something like as I'm getting older and my parents are getting older, something that I inspire to be able to do to support my family through some very tough things, but also being cognizant of myself in the experience too, and my feelings and my emotions as I'm supporting and facilitating these experiences for other people. So Thank you so much, Michelle. This has been so helpful, so enlightening, and I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thanks, Shanice. I mean, I hope that this episode not only is helpful for other people, but I hope it also honors the memory of Joyce, my mother-in-law, because one of the things that I really admire about her is how she moved through not even just the end of her days, but her entire life with this sense of agency, this ability to choose, this ability to articulate what is it that she wanted, and to be able to make decisions to bring that to fruition in her life. And I think she was bold and brave in that way. And I think it's something that's inspiring for the rest of us.
Stay tuned for the next episode, where I dig even deeper into all the feels and talk more about the various types of emotions you may notice come up in decision making and how to make sense of them. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you know of someone who might benefit from learning more about how to make good decisions, please send them a link to our website, askadecisionengineer.com. The website, askadecisionengineer.com, is also the place to go if you're interested in more resources on decision making or would like to submit a question to potentially be answered on a future episode. Again, this is Michelle Florendo from Ask a Decision Engineer. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.